Now more than ever, innovative technologies are fueling change and sparking new ways of thinking. Collaboration between corporations and startups is key to staying at the forefront of these trends. However, finding the right startups can be expensive, time-consuming, and ineffective. But Plug and Play is here to help. As a corporate partner, you will gain access to a whole ecosystem of innovation. Discover startups that meet your tech interests. Stay updated on the latest trends and network with industry peers. We will help you during every stage of your innovation journey, no matter where you are and where you want to go. Get in touch today.
Hey everyone, hope everyone is doing well today. Thank you for joining us during this workshop. Today we'll be talking about innovation funnels and how to measure value and think about those systems to motivate folks within your organization. So we have an agenda. First we'll do opening remarks, and then we'll jump right into our panel discussion with folks from John Deere, FM Global, EY, and Airkit as well. And then I'll do a short presentation in the second half here on how you measure value within your organizations and just thinking about those systems holistically within your org. So some housekeeping first. Please submit questions using the Q&A at the bottom of your window. If you have questions for any of the panelists or myself, I'm happy to answer them. And then feel free to also use the chat for general questions or comments. So any thoughts are, of course, welcome as well. Okay, so now at this time, I would invite my panelists to turn on their videos and unmute themselves. Again, really appreciate you folks taking some time out of your day to provide us with some insights. And maybe if we'll just jump into it with some intros. Vinod, maybe if you want to go brief overview of your organization, maybe your team as well.
Yeah. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, folks. I'm Vinod Sankranti. I'm part of John Deere Financial, which is a captive finance organization, and I'm responsible for a global fintech partnership. And I oversee fintech partnership across our regions in the US and Canada, Brazil, India, and our European.
Thanks for that. And Sujata, do you want to go next?
Sure. Thank you, Sean. It's a beautiful afternoon here on the East Coast of US. I always like to geolocate myself. Super excited to be here and exchange ideas with you, my co-panelists, and all the attendees. I'm Sujata Mehta. I'm Staff Vice President of Innovation at FM Global. We are a Fortune 500 insurance company, and we insure large commercial property. We are widely known or recognized for our engineering and resiliency approach to insurance. In fact, we like to call ourselves an engineering company that happens to be in insurance. My background is in computer science, and I lead the disruptive innovation projects primarily in data analytics, AI, and ML. And more recently, I'm exploring technologies like blockchain, Web3, NFTs, and metaverse, just to get our company to be future ready and be able to participate.
Of course. Thank you very much, Sujata. And Frank, if you'd like to give a maybe short overview of Airkit, that'd be great.
Of course. Hey, everybody. Frank Golden here with Airkit. We are a startup that's based in Redwood City, not far from Plug and Play. I'm actually based in New York. I lead our go-to-market East Coast operations. Airkit is a digital experience platform, and we help big and small companies alike, but many of the Fortune 500, build better applications for their customers that help drive more self-service, that are more personalized to their customers and proactive across different channels. So I've worked with a number of the Plug and Play corporates and excited to talk to you guys today.
Thank you, Frank. And Smita, last but not least.
Thanks, Sean. Hi, everyone. Smita Wahi. I'm a senior director in EY Parthenon. So at EY Parthenon, I focus on growth strategy and innovation, advising financial services clients. Prior to joining, the US practice in January, I was based out of London and part of the global innovation team for EY, again, advising clients and internally on innovation agendas, really, and executing innovation strategies. And before joining EY, I was in the industry, working for a global bank out of Hong Kong and Singapore. And so that's kind of my background. Very excited to be here and, talk on this panel.
Thank you, Shmita. And thank you everyone for being here. Really appreciate it. So without further ado, Vinod, maybe I'll start with you. And I'd be curious, other than financial ROI, which I think is common, what metrics do you track within your innovation system, and why do you consider those to be important?
Yeah, so like I said, the ROI is one of the perhaps the simplest one, or the one that comes top of mind. What we have been looking at is how do we look at the use cases or experiences that will make the experience for customers or our internal employees at a higher level. So that's one of the key metrics that we measured. A few examples for us to think about, and if you think about a chatbot, that's something that we started exploring and have a pilot going on, and looking at how many customers adapt to it. Just because we have it doesn't mean that they will come, right? If they come, how often do they come? What do they use the services for? So that's one key metric. We also have a payment services that we have been working with for about a year in India. We look at how many payments are done through it, and what is the overall adoption, what percentage of our customers are using the payment gateway, right? And as more customers use the payment gateway, how is it enabling our internal employees, the time that they would have spent to do manual collection of payment, how is that time being made available for them to do other things, right? Primarily customer experience and employee experience is what we focus on.
Okay, I like that. I think that really speaks to being kind of flexible with your success, rigid with failure. I like that. Okay, Smita, any comments on, other than financial ROI, metrics you like?
I think one of the other things one of the other factors that we have talked to clients about is speed to market. So with any of these innovation efforts, right? It's great in terms of the design stage, and when we are collaborating with other companies or startups or technology vendors. I think it's the speed with which we can take that to market. In this very competitive space in general, I think speed to market and being able to address client demand is quite essential. So I would say speed to market is another key factor I think that we take into account.
I agree. Okay, and Frank, any perspective from working with corporates?
So speed to market's definitely an interesting one, Smita. I totally agree. I would add to that, being able to iterate after getting to market and not just forgetting about it is one thing that we think is really important. And then the only other thing I would add would be adoption. Are your business units or your corporates adopting this and enjoying the experience with the partnership and the software? And on top of that, are your customers adopting whatever they're using, and is it getting the intended goals, whether that's CSAT or just conversion, whatever the metric may be?
Yeah, okay. And I know we've said a lot, but Sujata, I would love to hear your thoughts around this.
Sure. So we definitely, we kind of track ROI, but not in the true sense of the word. And I'll get to that in a minute. What we are trying to go after on our innovation is to sort of redirect our focus from sustaining innovation, which is thinking out, outside the box type of innovation, to more disruptive innovation. So getting rid of the box almost, so to speak, right? So our innovation proposals have two core requirements. We have high disruption as a core requirement to come up with ideas, and high impact. So in fact, our innovation manager, Alki, who introduced these ideas, she branded these almost, we call them gold proposals. And so one of our metric is the golden metric. Over and above everything else is the number of gold proposals we come up as a team, because I think that helps us to go after more of the disruptive ideas and technologies that and help us to take risks. And so coming back to ROI, the closest thing that we have to an ROI is we create what we call quantitative impact analysis for our projects. So to quantify the impact part of our proposals, that's kind of what we do for an ROI, but we don't truly track ROI, just to keep us staying in the disruptive arena.
Of course, okay. And I think it really helps employees when you bucket innovation efforts like that, right? To provide sort of a mental model like that. Okay, I like it. Frank, would love to hear your perspective on this next question and then open it up to everyone else. In your experience working within corporates or with corporates, excuse me, have you seen trends in what might cause a pilot or partnership to fail?
Yes. trends that might cause a partnership or pilot to fail, the two that come to mind are back to speed to market and actually not having enough time to do something. More specifically, like we've moved from 3 to 6 to 12-month pilots because we realized by the time you get off the ground, by the time you have it running, you want to iterate, the 6 months is already there and you're negotiating a new partnership agreement. So that's one thing. The other thing I think would just be visibility in the org and mapping out who else needs to see this internally at your company that innovation can introduce it to, and having a forum to say, hey, this is what we're doing. We'll provide updates that are ongoing, and then we'll show you the final result, and we'll show you the metrics that you were asking about or wanted to track. So those are the two biggest things I think when looking at successful pilots, making sure you have those two down, enough runway and enough exposure across the org with updates so you're not forgotten and that you are building on it together.
I think the momentum is important, certainly. And Smita, would love to hear the kind of consultant angle here.
Sure, absolutely. So I absolutely agree with Frank. I think speed to market is definitely one of the key elements here. I would also say having alignment and purpose. I think that is something that comes up a lot. You know, when we're advising corporates, organizations around, you know, partnering or piloting a new product, a new idea with a startup, I think alignment on purpose and understanding how you're going to evaluate success off the goals is, I think, the two things that, you know, I think we kind of start with. I think adding to that would be the cultural fit part of it. And, you know, again, culture kind of fits into the whole assessment of success. Like, how do you, are you assessing success in the same way? Are you aligned in purpose and, assessing success? I think those are things that come up quite a lot. We've seen a number of partnerships, not work out, in the way that they were meant to, at least at the outset, because, we haven't actually stopped and thought about, right, what are we trying to do? And, is everyone clear in terms of what the objective of this partnership, of this pilot is? So that's something I think we always start with, getting alignment there, communicating exactly what we're trying to achieve.
Agree. And Sujata, anything you've seen that is typical of failure partnerships in your org?
Yeah, I think over and above all the points mentioned by Smita and Frank, I think two additional points I'd like to make. One is agility. So like the approval cycles of corporate are in direct conflict with the startups, short-term agenda to generate revenue. And the approval processes are pretty onerous. So we have data security, legal evaluation, vendor management processes. So one of the things we've done is we've worked with our legal, security, and VM teams to create custom sort of fast track processes for innovation. One of the things we recently worked on is we created sort of a legal position paper so that the startups are very much aware of what they're expecting when they actually have to sign the dotted lines, and there's less of like redlining at the end. And the second one that comes to mind, where we're still trying to figure this one out, is scaling, right? So there's a huge difference between an innovation POC versus a major scale-up initiative with our product teams. Different teams, different stakes. And so I almost call the POC with innovation is akin to swimming in a pool with like floaties, versus working with the fast-paced, like agile product team is like swimming in choppy waters without floaties. So the startup needs to be able to make that transition successfully. And we've seen examples where the scale and the pace of an innovation POC for really small early stage startups works well at innovation, but when we try to then scale up and ramp up, that transition is really hard.
Absolutely. And Vinod, any thoughts here as well?
Yeah, I agree with all that was said before, and then interesting concepts, and it's interesting that each company has its own flavor of and how do we call failure or what did not work. The way that we look at it is, we have, I would say, 3 stages that we go through. One is we do a POC, proof of concept, where there is no data from a customer standpoint. These are all made up fictitious data. And then we go into a pilot where it is customer data, it could be a limited scope, and then of course the final production. So for us, we are testing hypothesis to each of those stages, right? So we've done POCs, and sometimes some POCs don't work because what we thought as a hypothesis does not pan out. So we have stopped there, right? So instead of calling it a failure, we think of it as a lessons learned. What did we learn? We started with the hypothesis. It stopped at, let's say, stage 1, which is a POC. And then some we do pilot, and then some we stop because of various reasons. One, maybe the business partner that we are working with is not fully ready. They had this hypothesis, but it did not truly prove itself, right? Or there was a feeling that we could build it on our own. So we have situations like that. We also have situations where the pilot was successful, but we're not ready to scale it to production. And Sujata, you mentioned about the scaling. That again becomes an important factor. Is have we learned enough that allows us to comfortably scale up? Sometimes that's not true, right? So those are the various stages that we go through that, and we consciously stop the project, and we can call it a learning, then failure. Just one other point is we also look at, we have a vendor that we're working with, and we want to be sure that they are ready to scale or take us to the next level, right? Are they in pace with the industry? So they are great when we started, they're taking us to be on par, but are they ready to take us to the next level, right? If they are not, perhaps they're not the vendor to continue with, right? And then we have to consciously look at other vendors who could take us to the next level. So again, I would not call it failure. This is just evolving and pivoting and making sure that you're learning along the way, and then find the right partner to move with, right?
I think it's a great perspective. And maybe staying with you, Vinod, do you have specific innovation-related KPIs or general goals for your teams that work especially well for you that you've found?
Yeah, so we always start with our strategy, look at what is the broader organization strategy, what is an organization OKR, right? We always build off of the broader strategy, right? And then under the strategy, we have various product families, as we call it. And then each product family has its own epics and, OKRs that we work with. So whatever we do, we align closely with each of the product and the organization strategy. When it comes to specific metrics or how we measure it, we look at it at the overall portfolio level, right? If you have a portfolio, we have currently working on 70 use cases, and we have vetted over 1,000 companies and so on and so forth. So we look at how we are progressing through each of our POC and pilot and so on. We don't measure it at a singular level, but at a portfolio level of what is coming through our pipeline, and what are the things that have gone into production, and then the value that is coming out of it, right? So if you ask me for a specific goal, we're not saying we have to do 5, 10, 20. We're looking at a holistic level, at a portfolio level.
Yeah. Okay. And Smita, anything you've seen related to KPIs that work especially well, or you just generally like?
No, absolutely. I love Vinod's response. I think it's spot on. Looking at KPIs more at a portfolio level, I think that is fantastic. That is the great approach to have. And I guess just building on that a little bit further, I would say at an organization level, we're also looking at things like culture. Are we driving an innovative culture? Are we encouraging teams, individuals, employees to come up with new ideas? Are we rewarding them, recognizing their efforts? I think again, diversity is another angle, in terms of another area that we consider when we're looking at innovation, and how we're trying to include that as part of team goals. Are we enabling diversity in thought, diversity of solving problems, the same problems from a different angle? So I think those are some of the key things that have come up quite a lot in the engagements that we've done with clients.
Okay, and Sujata, anything that's worked particularly well for FM Global?
Yeah, so it's very interesting. We know the strategy you outline is literally the strategy we also follow. So we align with corporate objectives, and we also track at a portfolio level. So at a high level, that's what we do. And then the other part, what Smita brought up, is we strongly believe that disruptive innovation will happen at the nexus of exploration and collaboration. So we've sort of aligned our goals around 4 core objectives, right? Exploration, projects, culture of innovation, and team performance. And then within each of these, we have what I kind of like to call quantitative mini metrics. And these are meant to influence how we conduct ourselves individually and as a team on a day-to-day basis, so influencing behavior. So we have things like, number of new signals or trends identified, Again, all at the portfolio level, ideas explored, proof of concepts conducted, relationships we maintain, or help culture things that we do, things to help our team members or other teams. Because like I said, disruption will happen when the exploration meets collaboration. So.
Absolutely. And Frank, before we run out of time, I'd love to skip to a question pointed towards you. I think something I've seen oftentimes in working with innovation managers is that they could hit a ceiling without leadership involvement. And I was just curious, Frank, if you've noticed a difference in the quality and maybe impact of the POCs and pilots that you've done, partnerships too, when it comes to you working with varying levels of leadership or sponsorship within organizations.
Yeah, kind of like I alluded to earlier, when we have height in an organization and breadth that we're being shepherded in from the innovation team is when we have the most success. And it's success from being able to execute and get both parties motivated, which leads to speed to market, which gets eventually to hopefully succeeding on what you agreed to, and then exploring and building on that. So yes, it's night and day when it's really like siloed in the innovation department versus when the innovation department is working with the other departments and introducing them to the technology to see how they can leverage it and creating excitement that way, and then providing updates to them as we're doing whatever we're doing together.
Right. Yeah, that understanding of importance, I think, is very important. Okay. Smita, curious, how do you, in your experience, take steps towards making sure that the innovation agenda is visible within organizations that you're working with? I don't know, sort of towards Frank's point.
Sure, absolutely, Sean. I think this is one of the key, problem statements, I would say, that we're often solving for when you're working with clients, and even within EY. I think communicating a clear vision is probably one of the key things that comes up, which is what are we trying to do, and what Vinod said earlier as well, looking at organization strategy. What is the organization strategy, and how does it fit into the company's innovation strategy? And I think it's not just communicating a vision, it's also about providing regular updates, providing, where we are in that journey, how much have we, achieved, what are we achieving, or if we are pivoting, why are we pivoting, or do we need to pivot? Having that open dialogue with employees, with, stakeholders is something that's quite key. I would say the second part is, and something again that comes up quite a lot is sort of supporting alternative career models or career paths. Now, a number of organizations, have, certain roles that they play with, have certain roles that are well defined, whether it is from a technology perspective, being from business perspective, from a sales perspective. Innovation relatively, is a newer, I would say a more recent framework or career framework that's, come into being. And being able to recognize, what sort of roles, what sort of growth are we providing employees or members of the the innovation teams in terms of their growth, in terms of rewarding the ideas they're coming up with, or thinking that they're providing for the firm's overall or organization's overall innovation. I think that's quite key. And I think, again, building a culture that recognizes the effort or the innovation efforts that these employees or team members are doing. I think whether it is allocation of resources, whether it's allocation of time, so it's not they're just always doing it at the side of their job. It's actually, this is your role. We are recognizing that this is what you're focusing on. It doesn't mean that suddenly your career progress or your growth is is impacted because of that. You can still grow. And then, of course, resourcing from a budgetary standpoint, allocating the right amount of budget, which is in line with the innovation strategy. And of course, that fits into, the overall vision from an innovation perspective. I think those are, the three key areas in my view, or three key ways in which we can, make sure that the innovation agenda is visible across organizations.
Okay, I love that you keep coming back to culture. I think when you're measuring value within a system, that culture really works to define, right, what is important for people. Okay, Sujata, would love to hear your thoughts on making sure the innovation agenda is visible.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is how the innovation team is set up also defines visibility. So for example, at our company, we were set up as an independent startup, with a mandate to focus on challenges of the future. We work kind of outside operational constraints, and we are primarily focused on innovating for the benefit of our clients, right? So if we take that into perspective, we report into our CFO, and so our ideas get presented. If we look at visibility, we kind of look at it from 3 different levels. So our ideas get presented directly to the C-suite. So we get visibility at that level. And then from the organization level, we have regular meetings with SVPs of all the different departments. So our innovation SVP will meet with them at least on a monthly basis and give them a heads up on the stuff that's coming down the pipe, particularly with regard to POCs that impact their use cases. And so there's visibility at that level. And then at an all employee level, we do 2 or 3 key things, which is we present innovation projects, agendas, even successes and failures at kickoff meetings, town halls of all the different departments. We, in a more participatory spirit, we invite employees across the company to participate with us in innovation learnings through a program that we call Innovation Igniters. And then we also do like company-wide talks, just explaining the purpose. Like Smita said, this is very new, right? So explaining the purpose of innovation, the role of innovation. So we have company-wide talks called Innovation Open House. And then externally too, we also make sure that the innovation agenda is visible to our clients. So we conduct tours of our innovation studio and lab, things like that. And that way we ensure that there's a communication of purpose and priority and perils, right, of not communicating.
Yeah, that's great. And Vinod, any last thoughts here?
I could just say ditto to what Sujata and Smita said, all great points, and we follow many of the things that has been said before by Smita and Sujata. Perhaps one angle I will give is, the key thing that, it's important for people like us that play the role from innovation standpoint is to bring an outside view that we do very consciously, right? While, we look at what comes from our product organization, hey, here is a problem code, help me solve it. Yes, we should do that. And then we also consciously look at what we call outside in, right? Hey, as we go scout through plug and play and other sources, what else is going on in the industry? We start bringing that. So if you look at my portfolio in the last 3 years, initially the heavy use cases were more on the inside out, and now it's tapering down and we're getting more outside in, right? And this is by way of creating awareness, be it calls with plug and play. We have something called Demo Day that we just like Sujata, you mentioned. We do it every quarter to bring. I think AirKit was featured in one of the Demo Days. So we bring companies in to create an awareness and share the trends. And we do it at different levels. Like I think Sujata, you mentioned about it from our C-suite. We have a president and his staff that get invited to Demo Days. We share with them the trends that are going on. We also do it bottom up, as we are bringing in vendors for demos. We invite them to come and participate, right? And then also the product owners who have been part of our journey through our POCs, a pilot. We invite them to come and present their experiences, right? It's not just one way, we try to do it both ways. So that's how we've been managing the overall visibility and a combination of mostly heavily towards the outside end to create the awareness of what's going on. So again, the culture part of it, I believe, will build as part of exposure.
Yeah. And speaking of creating that base level importance, Smita, we'd love to get your thoughts on how important organizational learnings from innovation are. But I think more specifically, maybe, how do you approach internalizing those lessons for other people from ventures, from partnerships, from POCs, from innovation activities?
Sure. So I think learning from previous or previous attempts at partnerships or POCs, etc. I think firstly embracing the lessons learned and building on that is something that is quite key. I think it enables companies to innovate at a new level, right? The next time around that they do it. So I would say 3 key things here, right? One would be documenting the lessons learned and sort of sharing them widely. So it's not, we tried a POC in a small, in a smaller business unit in one single country, but we're not necessarily communicating that with the rest of the organization or rest of the business units. I think that is something, we advise companies against. We would say sharing those lessons and sharing and having that open culture where people can talk about, again, culture, but, can talk about their, failures or learnings very openly and not be penalized for it, feel comfortable. It's not, it is innovation. It is, it's not, it's a trial and error. We're experimenting and our organizations are experimenting. I think lastly, it's the overall mindset, right? The mindset of continuously wanting to improve. So something that Frank said earlier, it's speed to market, but you don't just stop there, right? It's about what's the next version? What is the next version or the next problem we want to solve? Like how can we leverage what we've built to solve bigger, broader, more complex problems? I think that's kind of the three things we've seen firms embrace as part of learning from their past experiences, but equally also building a framework around how to do this and share this openly within business units.
Okay, and Sujata, any thoughts around internalizing those lessons?
Yeah, so I completely agree with Smita. She covered a lot of points. So what I'm going to do is kind of turn over a little bit to some of the lessons we have learned, because I think others on the call might benefit from learning from those experiences. So the three, I like to call it the 3 Ps, like purpose, peril, and process. So when we work with vendors or partners, we want to make sure we clearly communicate the purpose. And I know, Smita, you brought it up several times. It's very, very important, because you have to share not only the context, you have to help them understand your business model, and you have to help them understand the particular business problem that they're trying to solve, because otherwise you'll just be trying to, at crossroads. The second one is perils. So help them understand, set expectations, right? All the risks that are part of this innovation journey. Legal, just the role of innovation, the role of business, where does the funding lie, where does decision-making lie? And then finally, the process. So clarifying what happens during a POC, what happens after a POC, how does the startup or the partnership need to sort of evolve during the different phases. Those are big learning lessons for us. And I think the iterative part is also true. No matter where you start, right, your innovation journey, you are going to have to continue to iterate and tweak your process as you learn new lessons and accommodate them. And a lot of the times the lessons are also about timing, right? So we often revisit our lessons learned. We usually have a project called Lessons Learned, and we compile everything there. And then we revisit them from time to time and ensure that we are not repeating some of the mistakes of the past, and how can we continue to tweak our processes.
Yeah, okay, and Frank, this might be our last question as we're running out of time. Would love to get your thoughts, same question, but different perspective. Have you noticed anything working with corporates who maybe seem like they have internalized past lessons, or maybe they're more organized on their side? I guess curious, like what your experience has been like in testing out those relationships with various levels of corporates with different experiences.
Yeah. So what I've found in our 3 years working with corporates at AirKit specifically, the innovation teams that are empowered by the rest of the organization are the ones that get stuff done. And I'm talking like they do multiple pilots a year, versus others that may not have the same amount of power or support from the rest of the organization that seems looking outside in. And therefore, when it comes time to make decisions and to your point on timing, it's a much tougher process. Whereas other ones, like you said, the 3 Ps, they have a process. You come in, they tell you exactly what to expect. And if you do that, the desired result on both parties happens. But it's really clear to me that some innovation teams are like well-oiled machines, and we're like, great, like you obviously run a bunch of these, it's going to be great. Versus others may still be figuring out their process, or may be just a new organization for a new department within that organization. We're still trying to figure out what it means for that organization. So
I think that's spot on. Thank you, Frank. And thank you, everyone. We're about out of time now, but I really do appreciate you guys taking the time here to provide us all with some insights. Thank you very much.
Thank
Thanks, Sean.
you. Thank you. for
Thanks,
having
everyone.
us.
Thank you.
All right. Now for the next portion of our workshop here, I'll give a presentation, and it looks like I might have to talk quickly here through this. I'll give a brief presentation on measuring value, the system to do it. So again, thank you to the panelists. And before I get started, I thought I might introduce myself. My name is Sean, and I manage partners here at Plug and Play. So you can see some of the logos here on the screen, Progressive, RAC, Travelers, that I help manage. So I've also help to develop, some tools and products here at Plug and Play related to measuring and then augmenting organizational innovation capabilities. And today I'll be talking about a piece of those tools, and that piece will be the systems to use to measure value and innovation value specifically, and then motivate employees as well. I'm from Seattle originally also, so if you want to commiserate over the gray and the rain, I'm your guy. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so I think this slide is certainly an overused cliche and sort of a platitude in my world of innovation, but I think it's also quite insightful. A system really is only the sum of its processes, right? Its systems and its resources. So that system, which takes in these inputs and then outputs results and products, is tailor-made to achieve those results only, right? So like Volvo makes safe cars, sturdy cars. Mercedes makes fast and luxurious vehicles. And in order to change the results of that system, there are specific levers to pull on in order to do that. And I think this right here is the core concept towards making a business innovative, rather than this ethereal kind of hard to grasp definition. It's all about creating a system that is adaptable and accepting of change. And hopefully eventually it actually actively seeks out that change, right? While not foregoing any of the core business results. So again, certainly type of cliche, but I think also practical is sort of a guiding statement. So moving on, I'm gonna help define innovation a little bit further. So innovation defined. I think innovation really just within corporates is a form of persistence and disciplined project management. It's the process of finding new business models and products to forward your company's business interests. So that breaks down into two ideas here. Creating a demand for new value that you've created, and then supplying that value in a way that is both profitable and scalable. And I just, again, like with the last slide, I want to put forth this idea of innovation as value searching and then capturing, because I think too often innovation is this highly intangible buzzword, and especially for those that are maybe just adjacent to the innovation agenda. And that just really isn't the case. It could be methodically executed like anything else within a business. Okay, next slide, please. So here at Plug and Play, we have developed and iterated a framework for measuring the capabilities and innovation capabilities of industry agnostic companies. It's a 48-question survey grouped into the 5 dimensions that you see on screen. It's what we've found to be the 5 most critical inputs to building a truly innovative business. And these dimensions are interrelated and sort of constantly interacting with each other. I don't think any are able to exist in a vacuum. So the systems to measure value, which I'll be talking about today, depend on the strategic direction, right? And the champions and resources often work to define processes, so forth, so on. Each of these 5 dimensions you see on screen is comprised of about 5 to 7 parameters that work together to measure the overall efficacy of that dimension. For example, the champions and resources dimension here would include parameters that might measure role clarity, support function responsibilities, champion reporting lines, budgets, of course, and then sandbox environments, maybe training as well. So each of these dimensions has a set of measurable parameters that work to gauge the capability overall. I think while these dimensions are dynamic and interrelated, 3 often heavily dictate the outcome of the other 2. And those are the resources, strategy, and governance. So if you're familiar with the STAR model, now you'll be familiar with this concept of strategy dictating the other business levers, but I think that also governance and resourcing efforts can play an equally important part. They're more structural, without the formal and cultural approval of the C-suite. Just like Frank was talking about just now, I think innovation sponsors and champions hit this sort of ceiling within their organization. And without resources with which to execute on ideas, very little can be done, right? Just sort of this, this idea not executed on. And so that being said, and I think the majority of us here today have those strategy, governance, and resource pieces at least vaguely figured out. So I'd like to dive a little bit deeper into these systems to motivate and measure, but just briefly covering each so we have a baseline understanding. Starting from the top, oh, sorry, can we go back one more time? I'm just going to touch briefly on these dimensions. So we have a strategy which will have heavy influence over the others. I think effective strategy aligns the business from the most senior leaders to the frontline employees. Well, without it, employees are sort of lost. Governance is another one that is crucial. Without C-level endorsement, open lines of communication, projects just kind of stall out or fail. Champions and resources, this is measuring items like appropriate budgets and support functions, linking and training. There we have systems, motivate and measure. I'll be talking about this later. Repeatable and lean processes has to do with work streams and tools. How are you engaging your separate support functions? Is it standard? Is it known throughout the organization? And then you can see this graph is then broken down into 3 decreasingly large circles, and each of these represents a stage of innovation maturity. So I go over these just to let everyone know that they're out there. If you have any questions or feel like you're particularly bad at one of these, would love to chat with you about how to make improvements there. Okay, next slide. All right, so sooner or later, all businesses, or even the most successful, they just run out of room to grow. And so to jump from stage to stage, maturity stage, to the growth stage of the next business is what separates high performers from those, I think, whose time at the top is brief. With tech, in the last 50 years, the time that the average company spends in the Fortune 500 has, I think, more than halved to around 20 years. It kind of blows me away, but I think it just speaks to the fact that tech has really sped up this pace of growth. So yeah, so to talk about systems to measure value, I've done 2 of these workshops before. They're on strategy first and resources second. I think they're more structural, like I said before. And I just mentioned that first because I want to put forth this idea that there is a loose hierarchy of needs. I think it's different for every organization. So please take what is useful and leave what is not. But I do think that concept is loosely true for most orgs. Okay, next slide. Okay, so strategy and governance encompass and drive forward all the other aspects. Proper measurement, though, is what I think will ensure consistent growth. And without a clear idea through your org of what is valuable for teams, C-suite, right, frontline employees, organizing and motivating employees around that idea of growth, what that idea of growth is, becomes much more difficult, I think. So on the next slide, I'd like to paint an example. And this one comes from Moneyball. So it's a bestseller by Michael Lewis, if you're not aware. And it describes how the Oakland A's used these carefully chosen stats to build a winning baseball team for a discounted price. So for those not baseball inclined or who haven't read the book or seen the movie, before the A's adopted this statistics-heavy approach that Lewis describes, the MLB teams relied on opinions of scouts and recruiters, right? And they assessed players on their ability to run, throw, field, hit with power. And most of these scouts have been around the game their entire lives, right? So they use intuition and they use statistics that they thought mattered the most. But as you can probably guess, they were wrong quite often, especially with players who were effective but didn't traditionally look the role. And I think this speaks to Smita's point about new career paths and innovation being quite new. There's quite a bit of applicability there. And baseball managers used to focus on a basic number, which was team batting average when they talked about scoring runs. But after a more rigorous analysis, it was realized that a player's ability just to get on base is actually a much better predictor of how many runs he would score. So the A's looked for players with high on-base percentages, and they paid less attention to batting average. And this allowed them to scout and recruit successful players without breaking the bank. And in retrospect, they realized that they were focusing on the wrong team growth and organizational behaviors in general, if you've seen the movie, you know how hard it was for my guy Brad Pitt to break through that culture and change that perception of what was actually valuable within the organization. I think business executives who are seeking to create shareholder value also rely on intuition and historical figures in selecting what is important. The metrics that are used to manage, communicate results are often financial in nature, right? They're related to sales, they're related to earnings. And if they're not financially related, then they're loosely tied to loyalty or product. But I think oftentimes there's just not much stock put into those non-financial metrics as an organization. So, and I think if you work within a large corporate system, you probably know that those metrics have, if anything, a loose tie to you and your team. So I think maybe don't get tied into the statistics approach here, but the lesson stands for valuable growth. And on the next slide, I'd like to talk about some parameters that might actually be useful for your organization. So as I said before, each of these dimensions, the first 5 that you saw, are comprised of multiple parameters. And I decided to pull these 6 for the measurement and motivation. And I'll be diving deeper into the ones with stars there, so it'll be those 3. There will be a varying level of relevancy to your business. So again, I urge you to just use the material I'm presenting in any way you see fit. Each statement, or each parameter, excuse me, is a statement of truth. And in order for this framework to be useful for you, I would just simply consider how true each of these are for your team and maybe larger organizations as well. So those with the stars, I'll break down and elaborate on what different stages of competency might look like, and then some recommendations on how to maybe jump to the next level of that competency, or just generally make improvements. So I would like to talk about the ones that I won't dive deep into, at least briefly. So the first one there, our organization believes that innovation-led growth is critical and has set targets throughout the business to reflect the strategy. Okay, so again, I won't be going deeper into this one, so just a few words now. I think this one has to do with setting up larger goals for the organization to include innovation in the company's overall vision, but I think importantly, it has to do with culture and the communication from leadership that innovation is indeed important, and that just comes from a continued message over and over. Okay, the second one here, I will be talking about later. We're running short on time, so I'll move on. Third one as well, but the fourth one, we evaluate and track the financial impact of innovation initiatives across the organization. So some points now, I think it's fairly straightforward at a low level competency. You're tracking the financial impact of innovation activities. If you're doing that, then you would understand. I think at a high level though, there's more to it. Execution of this dimension isn't just tracking the financial impact of your innovation projects. It is, I think high-level execution involves company-wide financial goals. And so that could, for example, mean including innovation-led growth as a part of the revenue goals of the overall company. A 6% year-over-year revenue growth goal with 2% driven by innovation activities, I think that gives a real sense of importance and urgency to employees dedicated to or just supporting the innovation agenda. And I think it also communicates the requirement that real resources are then put towards the innovation agenda in order to help hit those goals. Okay, the fifth one here we'll talk about in a bit. And then the sixth one, we ensure successes are celebrated and rewarded for each of our innovation KPIs. So not starred, so quick thoughts here are to use the C-suite to venerate innovation agenda and the success it produces. There's such a good kind of totem for communication, making sure milestones happen publicly. Celebrating failures publicly as well, those are valuable. Perhaps even coordinating press releases to document what is happening if you kind of hit those points already. Okay, next slide. Excuse me for talking fast. I'm running short on time, so I'm trying to get through all of this. Okay, so our organization captures and creates learnings from successful implementations and cross-departmental deployments as a standard for future innovation projects. I think generally, it's easy for corporate executives to no fault of their own also to lose steam on projects over time. If they don't happen in a timely manner with lots of momentum, it can be hard to gain continued support. So when you consider that POCs and pilots and also investment activities from innovation branches have a hit rate of a very like 1 of 10, 2 of 10, maybe 3 of 10, it's very low. I think it's clear to see the importance of capturing values from these experiments, regardless of success, right, of commercial rollout or of implementation at scale. And beyond maintaining leadership endorsement, which is important, there really are valuable lessons in exploring new technologies and partnerships. So at a low execution level, more of the exploratory level, organizations might be well aware that they should learn from these, but they don't really work to capture them. So usually this means that the team is relatively new and there just aren't many learnings to be had. There aren't many cross-departmental deployments, successful implementations to really learn from. So if you are at this stage, my recommendation would be to just create the beginning of a knowledge repository of centralized documentation and then mark down what works and what doesn't. I think though with this, you want to be flexible with success if you're marking down metrics or processes that work. So on high alert for failure, but flexible with what success can mean for your organization. As you grow towards more streamlined performance, be careful not to be rigid with that innovation funnel. In the middle ground, I think it's common to be aware of these successful projects and the fact that they can generate learnings, but the tendency is to be too rigid. So just I would be aware of that. And now I think at this point, if you're doing this, it would be a great time to think about creating learnings from failures. Again, centralized documentation is important. Put failures down, reasons behind them in a common space, and then also ensure widespread access. I think the loan syndication team, if they are helping with the project, would consider that valuable. So failed ventures and ideas, critical output of the innovation agenda, and it's important to just treat them as such. Okay, executing learnings from success and failures at a highest level involves practices from both failed successful projects as well as cross-funnel deployments. And those would guide innovation projects through your funnel. So subsequently, your funnel would allow for flexible success, and then evaluating projects, but dispassionately discontinuing them if necessary. So at this point, I think centrally documenting these learnings is probably a standard part of it. If you find yourself at this stage, I would urge you to act as a repository of learnings and democratize access of your resources out to other business units and out from other teams. I think aside from the productivity gains, it can increase your standing. It can increase the standing of innovation teams within your org. Okay, now that we've covered a bit here, maybe on to the next slide. Okay, employees outside of formal innovation teams are also incentivized or rewarded for their engagement. So if you're running a POC with a company, that needs your HR data, legal is going to make sure that you need NDAs, IT might need to manage the data handover. You will need to have these functions set up and ready to go, and even willing and excited to work with you, right? This is invaluable. So in order to cater to all levels here, I'm going to touch on the importance just briefly. IT and data, what type of data will you need to transfer? Is it PII? If yes, what are the SOC 2 and compliance standards? Understanding the regulatory environment in your industry is important. So if you haven't taken the time to understand implementation requirements, right, projects may stall. And as we've said before, that could easily mean the failure of it. Maybe strategic goals have shifted at this point. Legal is another crucial support functions. NDAs here, making sure that everyone is within regulations. As with the parameter before, I think it's important to think about the overall funnel and where certain functions will need to come in and then support the project. And then ensuring that they're well prepared to do that. The wisdom here is similar to that of IT, just make sure that people are prepared and then ready to commit time and resources. Okay, so to touch then on measuring on value here, I think most organizations at least at some level reward innovation efforts for sure, but it's loose, and oftentimes it's more towards the explicit innovation teams, just not the broader employees. So if this sounds like you, I would approach leadership and push for an incentive structure that can be rolled out widely to all functions, or I think better, from the innovation team out to other functions, again, to increase standing with your company. And ensuring, of course, to align these rewards to what success means in your company, whatever that may be. I think this might mean linking these rewards to certain checkpoints along the innovation funnel, understanding where projects are at and if that should be rewarded. Did the loan syndication team, really like loan syndication, did they push forward a successful pilot into commercial implementation, right? Perhaps that begets a significant reward. And I think each company will link rewards to performance differently. It looks different for every company. In the case of 3M, there are significant rewards for shooting down projects, actually. And I think 3M is unique in this way, but they were thoughtful and they were deliberate in what would work for them. And they felt comfortable with their culture and goals in setting up this system, because quick testing and then early failure is what they're trying to achieve. They want to stress test and then poke holes in projects as soon as possible before manufacturing and engineering resources are put behind it. So I think many of you work closer to products like insurance or financial services, so this won't be the case. But again, I just urge you to think uniquely about your own company. Okay, and we're running short on time. I'm going to move on to the next slide. Okay, value creation is measured with KPIs other than financial ROI or P&L impact. If you're not doing this, value in your organization is likely defined only in financial metrics. Try NPS, try customer satisfaction, try reputation, and product quality as well. Once you moved on to measuring value with KPIs that are important for your team and company's growth outside of financials, attempt to implement those measurements with more regularity. Create standard documents. Provide ready-to-use frameworks for other teams that are supporting the innovation agenda, mental models for people to follow. I think now is a good time to be maybe more abstract, but no less essential. So items like reputation and avoidance of market failure. I know, we all have this way of thinking with companies like Apple, right? And I think that actually goes a long way for the customer. After implementing, an organizational awareness of these items, okay, we are running out of time. I would try new metrics, and I would try them from other industries as well. So a favorite of mine is to try entertainment and music and media, because they are often the swiftest to cater to new customers and their preferences and changing. So I would urge you to track what's happening outside of your space for new insights. Okay, and apologies for the swift exit here, the quick ending. If you go to the next slide, please. Do appreciate your time. And if you have any questions about the material I presented, I'd be happy to answer them. I know that this space can be a bit abstract and a bit confusing, but I would be happy to field any questions if you want to reach out. So thank you again. And other than that, thank you for your attention. I hope everyone has a great week. Thanks.